Okay, hello and welcome to Wordspace Radio. My name's Billy, and joining me in the studio today we have the very talented Pauline Kirk as special guest. How are you, Pauline?
Very well, thanks. Lovely day.
Yes, it's gorgeous. It's a shame to be inside, actually. It'd be nice if we could have a outside recording studio, but that sounds expensive.
Yeah, maybe we'll look into the budget with that.
How are you then? You excited to be here? You got lots of stuff for us?
I've brought along some of my poems and some extracts from novels that have been recently published. And, I'm just open to questions as well. I don't want to ramble on.
Yes, absolutely.
We love a good ramble at Wordspace Radio, don't worry.
We do, yeah. The whole show is rambling, but it'll be fine. Okay, do you want to introduce a little bit about yourself as a writer first, and then we'll dive into a reading? How's that?
That's fine. I write under two names, which is a bit complicated. I write as P.J. Quinn with my daughter, Jo Summers, and we write a series of crime novels set in the 1950s, actually. And they feature central character D.I. Ambrose. So we've had 3 novels published. The last one, Close Disharmony, came out last autumn. And we have great fun together because she lives down in Surrey and I live in York. So writing is very much at a distance.
Yeah, how does that work?
Mostly by email, thank God for modern technology, even when it breaks down. We work out a synopsis of the novel, first of all, so that we've each got a guide. And we've had lots of fun doing that on underground train journeys, sitting there saying, well, do you think that poison would work? And you get seats vacated all around you. So we have sessions together where we work out the plot. And then after that, we write separately and then send each other the stuff by email. And we go over each other's work and send it back and forth, until in the end we really can't remember which one of us wrote it first of all. Quite often one of us will say, do you mind if I alter that? And the reply will be, no, you wrote it in the first place. So we have a style which is now really a third style, P.J. Quinn. And it's a bit interesting psychologically because one of us will say, I don't think P.J. Quinn would put that. As
though it's some kind of another entity.
Absolutely,
kind of thing,
yes.
and you've got the sense of how your styles become another writer. It's kind of strange. I can't. Do you make any indication in like the front of the book that it's by 2 people, or do you pretend?
No, we don't pretend. Largely because it actually helps sales. Because contacts either end of the country have led to launches at both ends of the country.
Yeah, it would be a shame to not get the recognition, I suppose. Then, So I was just thinking, wouldn't it be weird if this Quinn was getting lots and lots of fan mail?
it would be nice.
Lost in the post somewhere, like thinking that it's.
I also write as Pauline Kirk and have done for years, and started as a novelist with a couple of novels in my own name. And I also am a poet in my own name and editor. I edit Fighting Cock Press, and I've also edited quite a lot of local history books. I used to live in Horsforth and founded Bramley History Society over the other side of the valley.
Oh, really?
So I edited quite a lot of their historical pamphlets and things while we lived here. Fighting Cock Press publishes mainly northern writers, but not totally, and was founded actually by Mabel Ferret, who lived in Heckmondwike. She died sadly 3 years ago, and I took over the press. So I sort of wear 2 hats, and it is busy.
Yeah, it sounds it.
Yeah, thanks for getting the time to go on our podcast.
Yes, because we were talking before, and we've figured out that you're actually the most published writer we've ever had on the show in terms of quantity of work. Because what was it, 3 books under your own name?
Yes, 3 novels. The Keepers, Waters of Time, and now Border 7, which is the latest. 2 of those are set in the future. They're not sci-fi, definitely not. I wouldn't dream of. I don't have enough technical knowledge.
Not a sci-fi fan, or.
I don't have enough knowledge. I'd make mistakes. Somebody'd pick me up. But they are imagining what life might be like for ordinary people in the future. And Border 7 is very much about big multinational companies becoming stronger than your governments, and a central character works for one of these big companies, and she signed her whole life contract. So in return for getting a health service, social services, accommodation, etc., you sign your life away to the big company. And when I wrote it, I didn't realise how prophetic it was, and there's an awful lot in it. People keep saying to me, that's a bit chilling because it's beginning to happen.
I was just thinking, it does sound like quite a reflection of today's society. It's usually wacky conspiracy nuts that claim it, but I think that there's something in it, the idea that big corporation really does run government sometimes, or at least influences it to a scary extent. So yeah, that's all. I think possibly that that book might get looked back on in 10 or so years as a bit of a even more frightening thing. You know what I mean? Like the way we read 1984 now.
All I've done really is look at present trends in both The Keepers, which was written some years ago, and in Border 7, and just say, where might these trends take us if we just follow them through? And try also to write an exciting adventure story, because you don't want to preach.
Yeah, absolutely.
And people have got to read because they want to turn the pages. So the central character is trying to track down corruption within the organisation, and has to go on a mission to the dangerous north. So you have to write things people want to read, but at the same time, perhaps might try to get them to think.
You can sneak in the any message you've got, I suppose, but the main bulk of it is just making sure it's a good book.
Yeah.
Obviously. Yeah. Do you want to read us a little piece of it then? Is that the one you want to start with? Or?
All right, I can do. I can start with Border 7.
Sorry if I've thrown you off there.
No, that's fine. I had an event last night in York, which is why I've got all these sticky labels in. I haven't had time to take them out.
Okay.
This is right at the beginning of the book, and Jude, the central character, she works for family security, and she is really a sort of internal police, but her main concern is looking after the families who live within this marvellous refuge, which has all mod cons, everything you could possibly want, except you can never leave it. So she works for them and has been involved in saving a baby's life in some circumstances just at the beginning. For the rest of the afternoon, a vague sense of dissatisfaction remained with Jude. She performed well in the gymnasium and was praised by her trainer, but still the unease remained. By the time she returned home, she was glad to lose herself in a trivial comedy show. Halfway through, the programme was interrupted by a series of public announcements. The first warned everyone to observe antiviral procedures when passing between levels. An extension of the curfew on city visits followed, virtually confirming that the fever was around again. It was a mistake putting the two announcements together. People were bound to fear another epidemic. Then followed a series of personal messages, reminders to individuals to attend social contact sessions or get their work up to date. Everyone dreaded being disciplined so publicly. It was like having to stand in a foyer with a placard round your neck. Suddenly, Jude sat bolt upright. She was sure she had heard, she was sure she had heard her own name mentioned. A man's voice came over clearly, though for some reason the accompanying image had been lost. Urgently, Jude pressed the visual control. A faint outline of a figure appeared, but no more. The voice repeated the message. Call for Officer Judith Shah, serving number 11690, member of the Family Support Corps. You are asked to meet your father urgently at Border 7. Repeat, Family Support Officer 11690, please meet your father at once at Border 7. In bewilderment, Jude stared at the screen. The comedy series had returned. It must be some unpleasant joke, she decided, beginning to feel angry. Her father was dead. She'd seen him die with her own eyes. What a horrible, hateful trick, she said aloud. Pulling herself together, she flicked on her communicator. This is Officer Shaw, she said. I've just received a peculiar message on the indwelling display. I'd like an explanation. No announcements have been put out for you tonight, officer. You must have been dreaming. But I know what I heard. Pausing, Jude considered her reply more carefully. You're sure? She asked. Positive. We keep careful records of all public service announcements directed at our staff. Have you been using too much Tranquil? No, I must have fallen asleep. Sorry to have troubled you. For a long time afterwards, Jude stared at the screen. She had not been dreaming.
Wow, fantastic. See, now I'm intrigued. Oh, you talked about a page turner.
Oh.
That's already a page turner to me.
No, it's you said that it's not very sci-fi, and it feels more like a mystery.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is what we write as P.J. Quinn.
Yeah.
Although they're set in the 50s and this is set in the future, there is a continuity, I'm aware, because I'm very interested in the whole theme of time and trying to create the feel of a period.
Yeah.
So the P.J. Quinn novels, we've gone to a lot of trouble to try and give the feel of the 50s without having long chunks of explanation. You've got to just drop it in.
I think
gently.
You've hit that nail on the head right there. Like you feel like it's definitely in the future, but not like hover cars and
That's right.
super technology.
Yeah.
It's believable.
Just
future.
drip fed with mentions of I can't think
The
what they exactly were, but
Yeah.
it was just specific things that
Agent.
harken to future technology
Yeah.
to just drip feed the idea rather than to outright say silly things like and transporter.
Well, they
pads
date.
and,
I mean, even Star Wars, the beloved Star Wars, and all the TV series, they date. You know that idea of pulling out something and flicking it. It's a mobile phone. We've got it. We haven't had to wait decades.
No, absolutely. It's crazy when you think of Star Trek.
Absolutely.
They predicted so many technologies that didn't exist at the time and do now.
So that it's not the future now when you look at a Star Trek.
Yeah, when the original series came out, automatic doors weren't a thing, were
No. Whoosh. Yes.
So, it was a futuristic technology for the doors on the Enterprise to open, and now we've got it in supermarkets.
Which is why I daren't name. I leave it to the reader to actually imagine what the thing is. So when she travels on public transport, it's a transporter that's just described as going very fast. Not explained how it goes very fast.
See, I pictured her like in a living room, just being like in. I don't know when you've seen like not sci-fi but future stuff, like being very pristine white clothes in a very clean modern, apartment, and that's just sort of like you get that through the writing. You don't need to say.
I think everyone will get something very different, won't they? You mentioned very vaguely the type of technology you use, and like you say, it can conjure up whatever science fiction influence you've had projects through. So you've not needed to be very sci-fi because everyone else who's got a sci-fi background can project it on the book instead.
In The Keepers, years ago, the first scene there was triggered by being in a dentist chair. Just this sort of helplessness as you sit in the dentist chair. Have you had a good holiday?
That is the worst.
And just taking that on another stage to being actually in some sort of confined chair where you're being tested and your answers crucially matter, and yet you're trapped in this chair.
That sounds quite. How do they link? Because Border 7's not actually a sequel, is it?
No.
It's just set in the same universe.
It's a companion. The publishers have described it as. Border 7's actually available as an ebook. The Keepers is available as an ebook now. It's out of print as a book, but it is now an ebook. and Border 7 has just come out, and there's years between them in my writing, but they do relate to each other in sort of the same approach.
Do any characters cross over, or is it more just...
no, it's a separate story, a separate
right.
novel. But they're roughly, I suppose, around about the same period of about 200 years from now. In The Keepers, there's been a civil war between the North and the South. And Scotland was independent. I'm sorry, I'm not a prophet.
What if you are? What if you've accidentally predicted? What if it all just comes out?
I won't be here to know.
In 200 years, they'll be like, oh God, Pauline had it right. We should have listened.
Yeah. There'll be bizarre, like, cults, like, making statues of you. She knew.
No way. No way. I've no illusions. The atmosphere of the P.J. Quinn novels is a sort of relaxation for me from these, because they're actually quite funny at times.
Yeah.
And I think I need both.
Yeah, the themes that you've mentioned in those books sound quite intense sometimes, and it's nice to be light-hearted. Is the P.J. Quinn ones a little bit more comedy orientated then?
Well, we deliberately tried to make them so that it would be a light crime novel. It's not slasher, definitely not. We talked this over together and decided we didn't want to do extreme violence. So there are murders, and they're not necessarily off stage, but people can be funny.
Yeah.
Even in dire circumstances, people can be funny.
It's truer to real life, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, like, you see all these crime books and crime films that are dark and serious all the time. You're like, that's actually not what real life is like, you know. And I think there's more skill in being able to have a serious story and incorporate real life humour than to just be grim all the time.
This is what we hope we've achieved. I don't know whether we have, I can't say, but each one of the three we've written so far has drawn on our own experience of often quite funny incidents. Close Disharmony is a choir tour which becomes extremely tense. They are staying in a hotel and, fireworks develop. Well, I've been on choir tours, and once or twice we have all felt like murdering somebody. And the previous one, Poison Pen, is at Writers and Artists Retreat, based to some extent on going on Arvin retreats with Joe, so we could do some writing together. And we just hope people don't recognise themselves. And the first one was amateur theatre. Well, I've done quite a lot of amateur acting in the past. And Joe's partner, he's a professional musician, and he plays a lot with amateur theatre groups doing light opera.
Yeah.
So all sorts of anecdotes sort of get drawn on.
We had that from, I don't know if you know Martin Bedford. We had him on, and one of his novels, Acts of Revision, is all about, this man in his 30s plotting revenge on his teachers who'd done him wrong. He was saying, we were asking him, are there any real life characters? And he was like, for legal reasons.
Yes.
I try and mix them up, so I assume you take sort of different anecdotes from different people and make
Has anyone noticed them being subtly mentioned?
No, I mean, as you say, you mix it up entirely.
Yeah, try and disguise it a bit.
You just make composites, shall we say.
Yeah.
So that tray in that person will be put with that person's appearance and whatever.
Yeah.
And then, if it doesn't work in the novel, you'll alter the whole thing. So by the time the character comes into the novel, fully formed as it were, they're not recognisable. You're just drawn on trays.
Yeah, so it's like only you know kind of thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Are you going to read us a section from this one?
From Close Disharmony?
Yes.
This is the beginning. There's a subplot running through it of a theft. And so it begins with that subplot and leads into the choir arriving. This is therefore the prologue, Tuesday, 8th December 1959. Creak. The sound seemed to fill the whole bedroom. Pausing mid-step, the intruder moved carefully away from the loose floorboard. Silence returned, broken only by the sound of gentle snoring. The room's occupant was fast asleep, oblivious to the figure dressed entirely in black standing in the doorway. The large sagging bed stuck out into the middle of the room. A faint ray of moonlight was struggling through a crack in the curtains. Brass bedsteads near the window reflected a pale light. The rest of the room was in total darkness. Checking the old lady was still asleep, the intruder stopped at the dressing table near the window. The top drawer opened easily. A hand felt inside, between the clothes, and then moved down to the bottom drawer. It jammed, the runners worn and uneven. Very carefully, the shadowy figure pushed the drawer back in. A mahogany wardrobe almost filled the wall opposite the bed. 2 empty cases were stacked neatly on top. The intruder turned the wardrobe key gently and, stopping the doors from swinging open, reached a hand through a small gap. Skillful fingers found a jacket pocket. Silently the hand was withdrawn and the doors locked again. Avoiding the creaky floorboard, the figure crept stealthily out of the room. Once again, everything had been perfect.
Fantastic.
And that sort of goes in and out of the novel, and you don't find out who that intruder is until towards the end. So the two themes work together.
Yeah, definitely keeps just keeps that tension kind of thing going on. So you keep going back to that throughout the entire book.
Yeah. And one of the things that, you're saying about dropping details in from a period, I mean, you don't have big mahogany wardrobes in hotels nowadays.
No.
You don't need to put cases on the top of them and so on. So that is 50s.
Yeah. And even if you don't, completely just think, oh, very 50s, it gives this vibe that builds up over the course of a reading, I suppose. Yeah.
One of the things that drew us to writing about the 50s is it's a fascinating period because it's not yet the 60s when loads of things changed.
Yeah.
It's not the war, but you can have characters who served in the war.
Yeah.
D.I. Ambrose himself has a lot of war memories, and so does his sidekick. You can also draw on things like having a woman PC, which at that date was quite rare, and had all sorts of opposition, shall we say, and flack from some of her male colleagues. So one of our central characters has grown. In the first book, she's only a sort of fairly incidental character, so WPC, and then people started saying, well, we like her, we'd like to hear more about her. So by here, she's a very important character.
Yeah.
The one we're working on now, we're working on a 4th, just started. We've been asked to try and make her more central, but you've actually got a problem there because in the 50s, she wouldn't have been allowed to do very much.
Yeah, she'd never have been central at all.
So her centrality, as it were, has got to come largely outside her job and then spill over into her job. But it gives you lots of room in the 50s for the way in which people's views were changing, but some weren't, and so on.
Yeah, it was a very strange time, quite a stubborn time for people, I think, because the tide of a lot of change had come in with advancements in science and massive change in technology and everything. But the social change, they were very stubborn with it, if that makes sense. Like, everything was bubbling up, but people, it wasn't until the 60s that the whole thing broke and society changed attitude greatly. So it was almost like they were living in a stranger world in the 50s. You get that reflected in the whole postmodernist thing that happened at the time, don't you?
Yes.
And
of course, if you were in a little town, like we've got an imaginary town called Chalk Heath, the changes would have been later than they would have been in London. And so it gives you room also for making contrasts where things are beginning to bubble up and Chalk Heath where they're just not. So
I think that's true for any time, really. There's always a place that seems a bit behind everyone else in terms of, social change and whatnot. More so, I guess in America, you see like some of the south of the country.
Yeah,
just
completely
Indeed.
behind the more
Yes.
progressive blue state kind of
Yes.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just a bit about the novels. As I say, Joe and I are working on just beginning another one as PJ Quinn. I'm also in my own right. I've dug out a novel that I did an MA in creative writing at Bretton Hall, and I did it for that, and it got lots and lots of praise, but response from publishers, it's too literary.
Oh,
So
well, that's strange
That
for a
seems-
publisher
I know.
to say, isn't it?
for a book.
That's almost a definition of irony, isn't
Yeah.
it? Surely.
So I stuffed it in a drawer and couldn't face looking at it. And then I got it out and I thought, well, there's a lot of work here, and actually I think it's all right.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of dusting it down and trying to modernise it and add a layer of modern story on
Yeah.
top of it, because it's set in the First World War and the 30s. So I'm imposing a modern layer so that I can sort of tell the story backwards. So I've started that, so really I'm doing sort of 2 novels when I've got time here
Yeah.
and there. Yeah.
Always
Busy.
busy.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff.
Poetry suffered inevitably the last few years with writing so much prose, but
Well, I think that you said you had 10 collections of poetry or something,
Yeah.
didn't you? You've done well. I think you're allowed to take a break from the poetry thing.
it bubbles up every so often. It's weird. I panic and I think I'm never going to write another poem. Oh well, I've written quite a few. Leave it at that. And then maybe after 6 months, suddenly I will start getting ideas, and I'm just reaching that stage again where I want some quiet somewhere. I can't write when it's noisy, so I feel I want to go away somewhere quiet and see if some poems will come back, and they have started to do so.
It is funny, yeah, poetry does seem to somehow just happen to
Yes.
you rather than...
Yeah.
I think with prose you do get that big inspirational burst type feeling, but I think it's more deliberate.
Yes.
Prose, you're very,
Agree.
very set out to do something, whereas poetry just happens. I mean, what's that Robert Frost thing that he said? Being a poet is not a profession, it's a condition.
It is. It's like, I'm often asked, for goodness sake, why do you write poetry? I used to be asked by the family. My family thought I was weird. It's like the colour of my eyes. I can't help it. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I'm stuck. I wish I wasn't. It's not a very sensible thing to do.
It's a wonderful thing to do, though, and I don't know where we'd be without it. We need more poets. I think. I think it's.
It's a weird thing where people seem to think poetry is like, a bad thing, or like,
Yeah.
they're like, oh, poetry. I think it's still sort of got this elitist sort of,
Yes.
vibe behind
you
it.
hear people say so often, "Oh, I just don't get poetry." It's like, what do you mean you don't get poetry? That's just like saying I don't like food. There's lots of different types of food, just like there's lots of different types of poetry. And
Yeah.
you might not get, Ezra Pound, like I bloody don't.
T.S. Eliot at his most
But-
difficult.
Yeah, but you could certainly possibly relate to Neil Hilborn, or it's silly to dismiss an entire.
Yeah.
I don't want to rant. I could go on forever.
I think we got the point there.
Yeah.
But it is a very fair point, and as a poet, you encounter it all the while. Sort of, I hated poetry school. I don't get poetry, and then if you can persuade them to come along to an event and you read more accessible poetry, they'll come up to you afterwards and say, "Do you know, I love that poem because it's just how I feel."
Yeah.
And I go away on cloud 9 when somebody says
Yeah.
that, because that's what I want.
Yeah.
I want to express something
That
other
everyone
people
can relate
can't
to,
see,
yeah.
but they can then relate.
I agree. It's an excellent feeling when someone
Yeah.
you read the piece to them and then they come up to you and they're like, I get you. I know what you mean. It's probably one of the biggest compliments you can get. That.
It's quite great as well. Sometimes if you've written something and you know how you feel about it, because obviously you wrote it, but someone else will read it and get something quite different from it.
Absolutely.
And it's always lovely to see someone else's subjective, different take on something
Yeah.
you've done. Does that happen with yours quite often?
Yes, I once had a very nice article written about me, analysing the poem in depth, and I didn't mean half of what was there in the article, I thought. And then when I read through the poem again, I realised it was there.
Yeah, you can kind of see how they came to those
Yes.
conclusions, can't you?
Yeah.
Just like, oh my god, I didn't realise that it could be looked
Yeah.
at that way,
Yeah. And it's partly the wonders of the English language, because a word in English can sort of shoot off at tangents, and you're using it in one sense, but it's such a rich language that it can actually have several other senses which somebody else may pick up. I try to do that deliberately so that my poems are shorter, so that you use one word instead of three. And I usually start with a long poem which I cut and cut and cut. Everything ends up smaller. And that's partly because we have such a wonderful language.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very true.
I'm fascinated to hear some now.
I'll read you a very recent poem first of all. This is one. I went to London for one of the launch events for PJ Quinn, and while I was down there I went into the London Museum, and they had an exhibition of photographs from the period round about the First World War by a woman photographer who was very rare then. And one of the photographs triggered this poem, and it came, sort of the image came back to me, and this is the picture. Family group. My jacket chafed, the collar too tight, buttons pulling across my chest. We stood stiffly, not yet parted, but no longer together. Better to leave now than wait, with Millie trying to be brave and not daring to speak, and her mother in her dourest chapel face black, as if she were burying me already. The photographer helped fill the space between farewell and whistle. We stood in line beside a stranger and his family. It was cheaper to share. I never saw him again. Maybe a bookcase in some northern town shares us still, our last picture before the whistle blew.
Wow.
Thought of these volunteers going off and whether they ever came back. They're just
Powerful image.
frozen in that photograph.
I loved that line, filled the space between farewell and the whistle, was it? I think that was really clever way of putting, that's wonderful.
Thanks. I do write a lot about war, I realise. Very sort of troubled by a lot of what's going on at the moment.
Yeah.
An older poem, several older poems concerned the invasion of Iraq, and unfortunately they're still relevant, and I wish they weren't.
Yeah.
And see if I can find one of them for you now.
We've just got political.
This is Refugees. When do we leave? Cancel the milk? Stop the papers? There are whispers on the train, and letters go astray. We are not wanted here. Once we were decent folk, growing a little stout, respecting the law and the neighbours. We cast our vote when we remembered, and forgot it decently afterwards. Now waiters refuse to serve us, and the school has no places. The man on the street shouts hate, not news, and our parties are invaded by black-shirted men. Perhaps we should pack our cases, but where should we go, and how? The wind blows cold across the station. Who would want us anyway? Decent folk, growing a little stout. And, sort of thinking both back and forward with the refugees particularly from Hitler, but now this massive tide of refugees from Syria and North Iraq and so on. And how would I react? Would I have the courage to flee? I asked myself. Because it must take courage, particularly in a leaky boat.
I couldn't think of anything more terrifying, to be honest.
No.
You don't know really where you're going to end up, or
It's crazy thinking we still have situations like this in our day and age. It's mad.
Having written for quite a while, I wish some of my earlier poetry wasn't still relevant almost, but it is.
Yeah.
I've dug some of it out and read it at readings, which is nice to give it an airing again, but you sort of wish you'd moved on.
Oh,
yeah, I think it's probably just one of those things though where it will probably stay relevant in some way, shape or form for a long,
Yes.
long time, sad to say, while ever we're still violent and stuck towards one another.
Human nature being what it is.
Yeah.
On the bright side, at least it means that your poems are going to remain, you know, worth reading still. Because it would be a shame if just all wars stopped, right? Everyone's war fiction and poetry would be crap then, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I do write lighter things. This is a lighter one, just to balance a bit. Very recent again. It was actually triggered by, in York, there used to be peacocks around near the library, and I was taking a creative writing group there, and while I was taking it, this peacock sort of wandered past the window. But the idea has only really turned into a proper poem now. Peacock. Gaudy inquirer, do you laugh at us? You, with your iridescent punk head, your jade flame of a neck. Do mere humans amuse, slotted in desks beneath your preening gaze? We must seek inspiration, but you simply stretch to spread rainbows across our view. You distract, and surely know it, flickering an eyelid flirtatiously. A gigolo of the bird race, strutting your stuff on a college lawn. I haven't a chance against you. So
I like that.
Yeah,
Iridescent punk head. It's one of the coolest descriptions I've heard for a while.
So, I'm not always serious. I wouldn't want to give the impression I am. Apart from anything else, if you do pub readings, you need some lighter stuff.
Yeah.
Need to mix it up, don't you?
Yeah.
You know, you can't only make everybody miserable. You want to. The point of poetry really is inspiring a variety of emotions, and you got to try and get that across.
Yeah. And you need different sort of poems for doing public readings in difficult circumstances to what you might have on the pages of a collection where people can, meditate and turn it back and forth. If you're reading against a jukebox in the background and the bar just to the side and somebody's got a cash machine going ching ching ching, you've got to have something you can belt out.
Absolutely. Where the meaning is, you can still be figurative and symbolic and everything because that's poetry and that's the realms you're in, but where the meaning comes across on the first listen.
Yes.
Not one of it's not one of these poems that you got to read 11 times before it finally clicks.
That's right.
you know.
Yeah. So I tend to write some stuff simply for performance. I know it wouldn't stand really very close examination, but it goes down well in performance.
Yeah. There's definitely a difference should be a big difference between performance and read poetry, and it's worth bearing in mind with people who are wanting to read the stuff out. They should definitely be thinking about which ones are best suited.
Yes.
Because I've definitely read out at the Wordspace event before stuff that actually wasn't well suited to be,
You hear the lead balloon effect,
Yeah.
and you think, no, that perhaps wasn't the best one to
Yeah.
read. Or you're aware that people can't cope with what you're saying while there's so much distraction around that it's too dense for them to follow.
Yeah.
So yes, you learn.
Do you prefer to perform poetry, or do you think that it's nicer to just let somebody quietly read it?
I like to do both. In York, there's a very strong performance scene. There's a number of spoken word type mics, open mics. I belong to one called Spoken Word, but there's several others.
They're becoming increasingly popular again, aren't they?
They are.
Recently.
It's really good.
They're perhaps becoming like folk music was a few years back.
Having a bit of a rebirth. Because I remember
Definitely.
when I first started getting into literature and poetry, couldn't find a place at all to do that kind of thing. I mean, maybe it's because I'm in Doncaster where culture goes to die.
Yeah.
But, these days, I mean, there's 5 or 6 that I know of in Leeds, isn't there?
There's
Yes.
tons in Leeds.
Yeah.
Yes. Sometimes the poetry that's read is pretty dire, I must admit, and there tends to be a bit of a revivalist atmosphere when people say, yeah, and you think that he could be saying amen, But a really good open mic is brilliant, absolutely, and you can test your stuff out in it very well.
Have you ever been to Wordspace?
I haven't, no.
Oh, should get down to it. It's good now.
Yeah, it's coming over from York that's the problem.
Oh, yeah, that's true. It's awkward time at night, isn't it? Actually?
Yeah, we finish usually at about 11, so it is pretty much only for Leeds people or car people.
Yeah, you have real problems with public transport nowadays, even within cities for evening events. So, it would be difficult for people to come over.
Yeah. But living in York, like you say, there's no shortage of places for you to go.
No.
There's apparently a good one in Leeds, actually, that they do at the Tetley. You know, the hipster bar that used to be a beer brewing place. Yeah.
I've done events at the Heart. That's a nice venue in Headingley.
Yeah.
I did one.
Oh, I've been there.
Did one there a month ago. Just a poetry reading, actually. That was a daytime one.
Yeah.
I can get to daytime things.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, do you have any readings coming up that you'd like to plug and advertise?
Unfortunately, I would have been plugging last night, but last night's over. I don't have any readings booked at the moment because it's the quiet season. It starts to go quiet in sort of June, July. But I shall be doing quite a lot again in September and October, all of which and I'll be in the York Literature Festival along with Pennine Poets, which I belong to. And we're launching the 50th anniversary of Pennine Poets, Fighting Cock Press, and are editing an anthology of current Pennine Poets. I edited one 10 years ago for the 40th anniversary, in fact two companion anthologies, and they were historical, growth of them, poetry across the north kind of thing.
Yeah.
And now I'm working on with Graft Poetry and their editor, and 50th anniversary one, which will come out next year. So I shall be launching that and taking part in the York Literature Festival next year, and probably quite a few other places. We're putting out feelers to get invitations to launch this.
Yeah, we went to York Literature Festival this year, didn't we?
We did, only for one event.
Only for one event.
We found out about it late and we're a bit skint. But it was fantastic.
Yeah.
It was a folk band called Union Jill. Don't know if you've heard of them.
I know Union Jill.
Yeah, and they were
Yeah.
performing alongside a poet whose name escapes me now, but she was
Kate Fox, I think.
She was spectacularly funny anyway, wasn't she?
Yes, they get some top liners actually, and they get, it's not just literature. They get some very interesting sort of political and social figures, and I because I steward, I can get in on some of them, for at least a reduced price, if not free. So in return for stewarding, so I've managed to hear quite a few people like Tony Benn in the past.
Wow.
So yes, that's well worth watching as a festival.
Brilliant stuff. I think that we could probably use you as a good friend, and you can help us get some more interesting people on the podcast. What do you reckon?
I can try definitely for you.
I've been wanting to get Union Jill on the podcast. I know that it's more of a literature thing and not a music thing, but I kind of fell in love with them a little bit when we saw them.
They do write their own lyrics, so you've got crossover there.
Yeah.
Well, they've got a song that was based on William Wordsworth that they played a couple of times.
And we know Martin.
Yes.
Not Martin, sorry. Miles, yeah. So.
Miles, yeah. Shall I read one more poem? And is that what you want? Or
no, absolutely. You keep on reading whenever you still want to. We're happy to hear as much as you've got.
Yeah.
This is Miner's song, which I'll cut a bit because it's quite long, but it has been performed to music. It's been turned into a small play as well. But it features, I don't know whether you know, out the lane that runs down here below the college, and turns into Lee Lane East. Well, Lee Lane East has bell pits by it. Those hummocks you see in the field by the old mule track are actually old bell pits. And when I lived on Lee Lane East, locals told me about a tragedy that had taken place on just that area where one of the bell pits had collapsed. So this poem I actually wrote while we lived in Leeds, but I thought it might be interesting because it's so close to the college, and you could go along and look at the site of this yourselves.
Okay.
Miner's Song, the Horsforth Ballad. On February the 5th, 1806, the mouth of one of the bell pits in Horsforth collapsed. burying a number of miners alive. They spoke for several days, and air was admitted to them through a hole bored in the earth. Down this passageway a few beans were scattered, but no other relief could be given to the men, who remained underground for 12 days, until their bodies were brought to the surface. We were but poor men, used to cutting coal, not city ways. We trudged Lee Lane each day, with pick and boy, snap and stubborn mule. Rough speech and hard work, 'twas the only way we knew. We mined Lord Stanhope's land, and for Lord Stanhope's house and leisure crawled through clay and cold, a draggled band, too weary for thought of church or pleasure. Oh, bury me in the green yard beside the church, or bury me at home near the buzzing hive. Bury me anywhere, sweet folk, moor or marsh, so long as you bury me not here alive. Bell pits are evil places, e'en seen in the sun. They close on you sudden-like, with a terror of falling soil and stone. We always feared this one, thought it time to move, but the master said there was good coal to be won still. So we dug deeper, and sweated and swore, though the wind blew coldly from off the hill. By noon our throats were dry, our hands rubbed sore. When the lad shouted his warning, we ran too late. There was naught we could do but scrabble, like mice in a cage, sealed to our fate. We were shut in together, a frightened rabble of 11 boys and men. A few of us prayed, most cursed heaven, or simply sat down and cried. Then hope began. In time we would be saved, Bob said, and honest Bob never lied. They heard us tapping and calling at last, and air was got to us, for our prison was foul. They dropped green beans for to break our fast, but green beans will not stitch body to soul. Now we are worn out with watching and waiting. We dream of sunlight and hunting with dog and stave. For near a week our women have stood watching, but Lord Stanhope's field is like to be our grave. Oh, bury me in the green yard beside the church, or bury me at home near the buzzing hive. Bury me anywhere, sweet folk, moor or marsh, so long as you bury me not here alive.
Fantastic.
Brilliant. Did you say that was turned into a play?
Yes, I unfortunately missed it myself.
Really? No way.
I never saw it, but a chap who was a student of drama turned it into a play, and it's been set to music twice at least.
That's fantastic.
It was set to music by a second time. My son set it the first time. Second time it was set by a student on the York University music course, and it was performed by the York University music choir, the 44 I think they call themselves.
Yeah.
So that was brilliant. I went along to hear it.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Obviously it attracted a lot of attention, and it does read like a poem that would lend itself well to having a musical accompaniment.
Well, that refrain actually comes between every second. There's 2 verses refrain, 2 verses refrain.
Right.
Which obviously was going to bore on a radio reading, but it does mean you can set it.
Yeah, it makes
Yeah.
it more like a song
Yes.
kind of vibe. So yeah.
I've written quite a few ballads because the old ballad form is very good for telling a story
Yeah.
with.
Yes, I tried to write a ballad once. It did not go well for me.
It's worth working on, because if you're going to deal with historical themes particularly, it can be very appropriate.
Yeah.
So long as and you can get away with rhymes that are perhaps a bit too insistent for the modern
Yeah.
ear otherwise. I tend not in my general poetry to use end-stopped rhyme much.
Yeah, because people think it feels forced, or they'll sneer sometimes at like you only use that word so you could say that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Like, but you don't get that. You don't. It doesn't seem to matter as much in classical
No.
poetry forms, does it?
No. Obviously sonnets and so on, they have to rhyme if you're following the traditional
Yeah, otherwise
form.
it's not really a sonnet, yeah.
Yeah. I'll read a lighter one because that last one was, really quite dark. Trying to remember which book it's in.
You've got too many to choose from, haven't you?
Burying my own books. Her sisters. I've got a note on the pieces of paper, but can I just find which one?
Yeah, you go ahead and fidget around. We can.
We've got the magic of editing.
Yeah.
I just wanted to find where her sisters is.
It must be a mad feeling to have written so many books you don't even know which one's got what in it.
It's a good sign.
Yeah. It could also mean that I'm too prolific. That can be an insult, actually. Critics will say, the prolific Pauline Kirk, and I go, oh, because that suggests that I have written too much and none of it good. Which, is always a problem.
I'm sure that's not the case at all. I don't think that's how they mean it when they say it.
I'll read this one instead, just to save faffing about.
Okay.
Nursery rhyme. My mother said I never should play with the gypsies in the wood. If I did, she would say, naughty, naughty girl to disobey. It was a favourite rhyme, played patter cake, but it taught me well. I passed exams, achieved, wore my academic gown, and never asked what lay among those forbidden woods. When I was a woman, I did try to explore once. I hid between Walt Disney pines, where twigs reached out like knuckled fingers, and Hansel and Gretel ran for their lives. I discovered firelight and music, and travellers offering wine. But my mother had said, and I always was a dutiful girl. Sadly, I turned back down the path and pressed my hands against my ears. One wild moonlit night, though, when owls are flapping in my brain more than usual, I shall try again. I shall tiptoe out of my house, follow the fiddle and the dancing pipe. Deep, deep I shall run, down into the darkling woods, and some of the things my mother said I never, never should.
I like that one. That's a good one to end with.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
That was cool. I like the way the rhyme scheme kind of faded in now and everything. Very cool.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, awesome. Well, I don't think we should ramble on about it too much, but I could probably talk further about it. It's been lovely having you on the show.
Thank you.
Anything last minute you want to say, or
Any plugs?
I would be so grateful if people would buy the last two novels. It's getting very hard to get libraries to buy them because of austerity, and big book chains will not take small independent publishers much, and they're published by a York publishing house called Stairwell Books, which is growing fast, but it's very difficult to get into the big publishing houses, so sales tend to be direct more or from Stairwell, though they're on Amazon as well. So Close Disharmony and Border 7 and any of the PJ Quinn novels, have a look on the internet and look for stairwellbooks.com or for my website, paulinemkirk.com.
we'll post all the links in the description-y bit, and
that's be great,
yeah,
because it is an increasing struggle for all authors who are not really big names. It's become a sort of smaller and smaller coterie of really big names who do the circus tour all around the country, and they merit it. I'm not sour grapes, but as in music, music producers are less willing to risk new names on CDs. It's the same in literature.
Yeah.
So I would just say, support your independent bookshop, support your independent publisher, please.
and your local literature scenes, I suppose. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, you heard it, didn't you? You got to buy the books, listeners.
Thanks.
All right. It's been wonderful having you on. Thank you very much, Pauline.
Thank you. Right.